For nearly a century, the Philadelphia crime family stood as one of America's most feared mafia organizations. From the narrow streets of South Philly to the industrial sprawl of the Northeast, their reach touched gambling halls, union offices, and drug pipelines. But in the underworld, no empire stands unchallenged. Over the decades, the Philly mob has clashed with powerful and unpredictable enemies: outlaw bikers, ruthless drug crews, and neighborhood gangs who refuse to bow to Cosa Nostra tradition. These weren't rival mafia families. These were outsiders armed with different codes, different loyalties, and a willingness to spill blood in the fight for territory and profit. From the precision burglars of the Kensington and Allegheny Gang to the violent riders of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, from the street discipline of the Philadelphia Black Mafia to the ambitious drug crews of the 1990s, each conflict tested the mob's ability to hold on to its grip over the city's criminal economy. These are the stories of the times when the Philadelphia crime family went to war, not with other mobsters, but with gangs who dared to challenge the throne. The K&A Gang versus the Philadelphia crime family. In the gritty backstreets of Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood, where the smell of machine oil mixed with the ever-present haze of cigarette smoke, a band of master thieves rose to prominence. They weren't mobsters in the traditional sense. They were burglars, safecrackers, and thieves for hire. They called themselves the Kensington and Allegheny Gang, or simply the K&A. Born in the blue-collar Irish-American heart of Philly in the 1950s, the K&A Gang specialized in precision burglaries and heists, cracking safes with surgical skill. But as their power and money grew, so did their problems. Standing in their way was the city's most feared criminal force, the Philadelphia crime family, ruled with quiet authority by mob boss Angelo Bruno. The Philadelphia mob's empire stretched across the city: bookmaking, shylocking, union rackets, and control over the drug trade. Bruno was known as the Gentle Don, preferring negotiation to outright bloodshed, but he demanded respect, loyalty, and tribute. If you made money on his turf, you paid for the privilege. The K&A, however, weren't in the habit of bowing to anyone. They operated in Northeast Philly, a part of the city the mob traditionally viewed as outside its primary strongholds. In their early years, the relationship was uneasy but tolerable. The K&A hit commercial targets, banks, and jewelry stores. Crimes the mob wasn't directly invested in. But by the late 1960s, the lines began to blur. K&A members started taking on side work in protection rackets, loan sharking, and even dabbling in the drug game. These moves brought them squarely into mob territory. Bruno's underbosses, particularly those overseeing Northeast operations, began pressuring the K&A to kick up, to pay tribute as an acknowledgement of mob authority. Some K&A leaders complied. Others refused. What followed wasn't an all-out war, but a cold, simmering conflict. The mob began sending messages the old-fashioned way: beatings in dark alleys, trashed cars, and mysterious fires at bars run by K&A associates. The burglars responded in kind, robbing warehouses under mob protection, targeting businesses known to be paying the Philly family. By the early 1970s, tensions escalated over the most lucrative racket in the city at the time: illegal gambling. The K&A had built a small network of numbers runners in their neighborhood. The Philly mob, long the undisputed kings of numbers, ordered them to shut it down. The K&A refused, insisting they'd operate only in their own turf. That decision came at a cost. Several K&A members were lured into mob-friendly bars and left bloodied on the sidewalk. In retaliation, K&A safe men broke into businesses owned by mob associates, sending the not-so-subtle message, "We're not afraid of you." The feud reached its boiling point when a prominent K&A associate was found in the trunk of a car in South Jersey, a bullet in the back of the head. Police suspected a mob hit, but no one talked. In the criminal underworld of Philadelphia, silence was survival. Still, neither side truly wanted a full-scale shooting war. Bruno's mob preferred making money without the unwanted heat from police crackdowns. The K&A, for all their pride, knew they couldn't match the Philly family's manpower in an open conflict. So an uneasy truce was struck. The K&A would continue their burglaries and safe jobs, but when it came to drugs, gambling, and loan sharking, they'd keep a low profile or operate quietly under mob oversight. The Kensington and Allegheny Gang would survive well into the 1980s, evolving from an elite burglary crew into a network of independent operators, many of whom eventually did business with the very mob they once defied. In the end, the K&A versus the Philadelphia crime family wasn't a war with a clear winner, but a reminder of an old truth in Philadelphia's underworld. You can be good, you can be feared. But in the city of brotherly love, the mob's shadow touches everyone. The Pagans Motorcycle Club versus the Philadelphia crime family. In the smoky bars and back alleys of South Jersey and Philadelphia, two very different outlaw worlds collided. One wore leather vests, patches, and road-roaring Harleys. The other wore suits, silk ties, and carried a century of criminal tradition. On one side, the Pagans Motorcycle Club, a violent, fast-growing outlaw biker gang born in Maryland in 1959, spreading up the East Coast by the late 1960s. On the other, the Philadelphia crime family, led by the quiet but calculating gentle Don, Angelo Bruno. Their battle would become a dangerous clash of cultures, territory, and power. The Pagans weren't like the street gangs the Philly mob was used to dealing with. They were organized, fiercely loyal, and unafraid of bloodshed. In the late 60s and early 70s, the Pagans began planting their flag in South Jersey and Philadelphia, taking over biker bars, strip clubs, and moving heavily into methamphetamine production. Meth was new, high profit, and deadly, and unlike heroin or cocaine, it wasn't yet dominated by the mob. But what truly got the Philly family's attention was when the Pagans began muscling into protection rackets at bars and clubs the mob considered theirs. To Bruno, this was a breach of the unwritten rules. His empire ran on order, each crew knowing their place. The Pagans didn't care about boundaries. When a pagan crew took over a South Jersey bar and told the mob-connected owner they were under new protection, Bruno's men paid a visit. That visit ended in a barroom brawl, leaving two bikers in the hospital. The message was clear: the mob would not tolerate interference. But the Pagans sent a message back: by fire. A club in Camden that paid protection to the Philly mob burned to the ground. No one was charged, but everyone in the underworld knew who lit the match. By the mid-1970s, the feud had escalated into a series of street-level skirmishes. Bikers were jumped leaving bars. Mob-controlled loan shark enforcers were attacked at traffic lights. In one notorious incident, a pagan enforcer was found beaten within an inch of his life in a South Philly alley, his Harley stripped and dumped in the Delaware River. Bruno, ever the pragmatist, realized that an all-out war with the Pagans would bring too much police heat. The bikers were already under heavy federal scrutiny for gun running and meth labs. The mob preferred to make money quietly. So the gentle Don did something he was famous for. He sat down with them. The meeting, according to law enforcement sources, took place at a South Jersey diner. Pagan leadership and mob captains worked out a tense truce. The Pagans could keep their meth business and certain biker-friendly bars, but they would stay out of the mob's loan sharking, high-end gambling, and union rackets. In return, the Philly family would look the other way, and occasionally even do business with the bikers. It was an arrangement built on necessity, not friendship. The truce held for years, but it was never without tension. Younger mobsters saw the bikers as loud, unpredictable troublemakers. Younger pagans saw the mob as old men clinging to power. Every so often, fights broke out, lines were crossed, and blood was spilled. But in the end, both sides understood something vital. Philadelphia was a small pond for predators of their size, and if they tore each other apart, the real winners would be the police and the feds. The Pagans Motorcycle Club and the Philadelphia crime family. Two worlds, two codes, forced into an uneasy peace in a city where power is never truly shared, only borrowed. Philadelphia Black Mafia versus the Philadelphia crime family. In the shadowed streets of North and West Philadelphia during the 1970s, a new power was rising. They weren't Italian, they weren't bikers, and they had no intention of answering to the Philadelphia mob. They called themselves the Black Mafia, later known as the Junior Black Mafia, or JBM. Their rise would challenge the city's underworld balance and bring them face to face with the feared Philadelphia crime family. The Philadelphia Black Mafia emerged in the late 1960s, born out of tough, poor neighborhoods and fueled by the heroin boom. They were disciplined, armed, and deeply feared, controlling the drug trade in predominantly black communities with ruthless efficiency. At the same time, the Philadelphia crime family, under boss Angelo Bruno, dominated much of the city's organized crime. Bookmaking, loan sharking, extortion, and increasingly, wholesale heroin. Traditionally, the mob used intermediaries to supply drugs to black neighborhoods, but the Black Mafia had a different plan. They wanted direct control. No middleman, no tribute. At first, Bruno avoided direct conflict. He understood the dangers of a street war. Instead, a fragile arrangement was brokered. The Black Mafia could dominate retail heroin sales in their neighborhoods, as long as their supply came from mob-approved sources. It was a deal of convenience, not loyalty. By the late 1970s, tensions began to crack the alliance. The Black Mafia, flush with cash, started moving into gambling, shylocking, and even robbing mob-connected drug suppliers. Several mob bookmakers in North Philly were beaten, their operations shut down overnight. This was a direct challenge to mob authority, and the response was swift. Mob soldiers began targeting Black Mafia enforcers. Shootings, street ambushes, and mysterious disappearances sent a bloody message: stay in your lane. But the Black Mafia didn't back down. They retaliated with their own hits, including the killing of mob-connected drug dealers who refused to cut them in. Law enforcement quietly noted that this was one of the rare times in Philadelphia history where the Italian mob faced a truly independent, equally ruthless rival in the drug trade. Then, in 1980, everything changed. Angelo Bruno was assassinated in a mob power struggle. The Gentle Don had been the main force holding the fragile peace. His death unleashed chaos in the Philly mob, and the Black Mafia saw an opportunity. They pushed deeper into mob territory, forming the Junior Black Mafia in the mid-1980s, a younger, flashier generation that controlled cocaine and heroin corners across the city. They recruited aggressively, dressed in designer suits, and drove luxury cars, sending a clear signal that they weren't afraid of the old guard. By this point, Nicodemo, Little Nicky, Scarfo had taken over the Philadelphia mob. Scarfo demanded tribute from everyone, including the JBM. When the gang refused, Scarfo ordered his men to send a message. Several JBM lieutenants were attacked or killed. The streets of Philadelphia became a chessboard of shifting alliances, with drug corners changing hands overnight. Federal agents warned that an open mob JBM war would leave the city soaked in blood. In the end, the conflict didn't end with a handshake. It ended with indictments. Federal RICO cases in the late 80s and early 90s shattered the JBM's leadership, while the Philly mob was crippled by Scarfo's conviction and internal betrayal. For a brief volatile moment, the Philadelphia Black Mafia, and later the Junior Black Mafia, stood toe-to-toe with the city's most feared criminal dynasty. It was proof that in Philadelphia's underworld, power isn't handed down. It's taken. Local drug gangs versus the Philadelphia crime family. By the early 1990s, the Philadelphia underworld was in chaos. The once feared Philadelphia crime family, weakened by assassinations, betrayals, and federal indictments, was locked in a bloody civil war. On one side stood John Stanfa, the old-school Sicilian boss trying to restore discipline. On the other, the young and ambitious Joey Merlino, backed by streetwise upstarts hungry for power. But while the mob tore itself apart, another threat was moving in. Local drug gangs, small fast-moving crews from North Philly, South Philly, and Southwest saw opportunity in the mob's instability. They were young, heavily armed, and unafraid of the old codes. Their business was cocaine, heroin, and crack, and their loyalty was to the corner, not the commission. For decades, the Philly mob controlled drug distribution indirectly, taxing dealers or forcing them to buy from mob-approved suppliers. But the 1990s gangs didn't want a middleman. They wanted the whole operation, from supply to street sales, and they weren't about to kick up to men in suits. As Stanfa and Merlino fought in restaurants, parking lots, and even busy streets, drug gangs filled the vacuum. Corners in South Philly that once paid tribute to mob crews began answering to local kingpins with crews of teenagers running the product. The response from the mob was brutal. Stanfa loyalists tried to force the gangs back into line, showing up with baseball bats, pistols, and threats of arson. Merlino's faction, meanwhile, saw the gangs as potential allies, muscle and money that could help them in the internal mob war. This created a dangerous split. Some drug crews aligned with Merlino, getting protection in exchange for loyalty. Others fought back against Stanfa's enforcers, leading to drive-by shootings and daylight hits that blurred the line between organized crime and street gang warfare. In one notorious incident, a Stanfa-connected bookmaker was gunned down leaving a corner grocery in South Philadelphia, allegedly by a gang-affiliated shooter who refused to pay mob taxes. A week later, the shooter's crew leader was found in an abandoned row house, his body riddled with bullets. Law enforcement called it cross-contamination, the mob's civil war spilling over into gangland, and gangland violence feeding back into the mob's blood feud. For the drug gangs, the risk was worth it. By refusing mob control, they kept every dollar of their profits, and they had the manpower to defend their turf. For the mob, every corner lost was a blow to their prestige and their cash flow. Stanfa's downfall in 1994, when federal charges took him off the street, shifted the balance again. Joey Merlino took control of the Philadelphia crime family, but the damage was done. The 1990s drug gangs had tasted independence, and they weren't about to go back to paying tribute. Instead, the Merlino-era mob often chose to partner with certain crews, using them as street distributors while keeping a share of the profits. It wasn't the iron grip of the past, but it kept the money flowing and the peace intact, at least for a while. The early 1990s were proof that the Philadelphia mob's dominance over the city's criminal economy was no longer absolute. Local drug gangs, once small players in the shadows, had learned they could stand toe-to-toe with La Cosa Nostra. The Stanfa-Merlino War may have decided who ran the Philly family, but the street gangs decided how much power that title really meant.